Welcome to this Academy for Teachers Masterclass on Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem with Brenda Jo Brueggemann. I'm Nana Tenya. I've been teaching art for 11 years at the Brooklyn School of Inquiry, and I love what I do. Seeing a student become more confident in art and realizing that they are far more creative than they think they are is a joy. I'm a proud fellow of the Academy for Teachers, an outstanding organization that truly inspires and supports educators, creates a real sense of community and excitement about expanding our knowledge on many diverse topics led by master teachers. I have the honor of introducing Brenda Jo Brueggemann. Brenda is a professor of English and chair of writing at the University of Connecticut, excuse me. She also teaches at the Loaf School of English at Middlebury College during the summer. Brenda has been deaf from birth. She has helped conceptualize the new field of disability studies and has written or co-written, edited or co-edited 16 books and over 70 essays and articles at the intersections of deaf disability studies and writing and art. I'm personally excited to take this class because I was blown away by Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem and her gorgeous delivery. And I've wanted to incorporate poetry in my visual arts classes for a long time and haven't done so, and this is the opportunity. But Brenda is not the only star in this master class. It is also my honor to introduce the 17 teachers here today who were selected from many applicants. This is an impressive group with advanced degrees in African studies, English, library science, reading, ELA, poetry, education, creative writing, linguistics, special education, and literacy. They teach K through 12 in public, charter, and independent schools. There is a lot of teaching experience here today. We've been in the classroom between 5 and 49 years. The total number of years that we've been teaching is 241. We teach between 25 and 535 students. The number of students who know our names is 2,324, and that's just this year. So your real audience today, Brenda, are those 2,324 children and the next 2,300 children we'll have next year and the next. Because every teacher here will in some way share with them what we learn from you. The ripple effect of a master class is huge. Thank you, Professor Brueggemann, for being here. Thanks to my fellow teachers for teaching. And with that, let the master class begin. Brenda, the stage is yours.
Yay. First thing is I remembered to unmute myself, so points there, right? No pressure. Thank you so much, Nana, also for including a little bit of the figures of who you all are. So I'm Brenda. Let's open up the slideshow, and you can put the link to the slideshow. There are those weird black boxes again. We saw them earlier. We try it again. And whenever you get a chance, you can put the link to the slideshow also in there. That's better, in the chat. So I'm asking her to run the slides for me because there are many things. Like most things about access, there are many things about Zoom that kind of facilitate access in different ways, but also need to block. I can't believe how much I've missed eye contact this year, and how much I need and rely on eye contact. So it's very hard to do in this space. And so you also then miss smiles because you don't make eye contact with someone, and that's the kind of thing that brings often opens up a smile. Eye contact, all the nonverbal cues, and it's harder to lip read people in the small little squares. So CAT is with me today. I call them CAT, that stands for Communication Access Team, which is a term I made up and I'm completely owning it. And there's also another cat right over here on the table beside me, and I'm sure he will make an appearance before this is all over with, because this is his hour. And so today, yeah, like many of you have already said, I was so blown away by this poem, and it doesn't matter how many times I keep reading it, all the things I still keep finding in it. And since I'm also a trained rhetorician with a PhD in it, I try to use rhetoric to apply. So I'm bringing both of these together. We're only going to scratch today. We're just going to do a couple of things, and then I've left you with a lot of other things on the slides and other approaches. This summer, I'm going to spend 6 weeks with this poem in one of the Bread Loaf small classes tutorials. So you guys are getting that, some of that opportunity, those 6 weeks really compressed down. I have not, you are the first ones. This is the first time I've done something with the poem. I've not used it in one of my classes at UConn yet this semester, because it was a seminar on professional and technical writing, so it didn't really match with the poem. I made my theme here, as you see, golden yellow for her coat on the simple slides, be the theme that runs throughout. If you want to switch to the second slide now. So hello, this is me, a picture of me actually from the last master class I taught in New York City there. It was a class on the curious incident of disability in literature, and focused on the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime as a primary text taken there. So I'm Brenda Brueggemann, introduced. I'm here today because I love teachers. I am one myself. I began my teaching career as a high school teacher back in western Kansas, in my hometown, after about 5-6 years. I went back to start taking some classes again, and then just never stopped, and wound up over here, still a teacher as that. One of the primary things I do at UConn is I teach the teachers. I train, I hate that word though, I teach the seminar that helps all of the new graduate students who've just arrived learn how to teach, particularly first-year writing classes there. I'm also here because I heart poets, especially sassy women poets, which we have for us today, and also because I heart rhetoric, and I never think of rhetoric as just the mere rhetoric kind. Let's go to the third slide, because this is you, and here's who you are. I think actually I do have Jonathan on there, but it was John Spear. And of course my autocorrect kept wanting to correct your name and take out that H in there, right, Jonathan? I'm sure you're used to that as well. So here's who all of you are, and I'm going to go ahead and say your names, and then if you would come back at me, kind of call and response, and tell me if you were going to the inauguration and you could pick any color and kind of coat, no cost barred or anything, what would be the color of your coat? So we're channeling a little Dolly Parton here too on this one, okay? So, and we were talking about this before the session. As a person with very deep hearing loss, I used to use the term hard of hearing, but it doesn't work anymore because I really am deaf. And have been genetic from birth. I was terrified when I began teaching about standing in front of a classroom and having to call roll and mess up all of their names, because pronunciation was always an issue for me, which is a thing that I bear in common with Amanda Gorman. But now I just kind of completely have fun with it. Like my joke is, to the students, how many ways can I mess up your name? Give it a try. So I'm going to say your name, and then you can also correct it back and say it better if I don't get it back. So Rebecca Barr, what is your coat? What color is your coat? You got to unmute. Is she out there? She's not there.
Sorry. I'm here. Sorry. Trying to. Yes, Rebecca Barr is correct. I would wear purple, a purple coat, and probably like a copy of Amanda Gorman's in my size. I liked hers.
Dark purple or lighter violet purple?
Kind of a bright purple, like in between. So in between.
Oh, Yeah. Okay. Lewis, too.
Hi. I think it would have to be a blue coat for me.
Okay. What shade of blue? Blue's a big.
Something in the dark denim area.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. And I know Alyssa's not here today. I know Alyssa from Brudlow, but Sam said she wouldn't make it today. So the next one, Mary Seiler. Are you out there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I think I'd wear a white coat. Just white.
Okay. Great. I don't know. I'm over here fiddling. It's also a personal note. If you see me looking over this way, I'm looking at the captions intently, which somehow got disconnected. So I'm calling them back up again. And if I'm looking over this way, it's on my other laptop where I have the slide deck also running. So, and obviously when I'm looking here, I'm looking right into the screen. Asiya?
Asya, that's the third time's the charm. Asya. I would wear, gosh, I don't know, some sort of patchwork of a bunch of colors. I always think I'm wearing something muted, and I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and then I realize it's like this hodgepodge of everything. So probably a patchwork of some colors.
Okay. Ashley.
I would go like full rainbow coat, I think.
Okay. Catherine, although I saw Catherine went by Katie, her name on the screen was Katie, right?
That's right, yeah. I would wear a peacock patterned coat with the colors of peacock feathers.
Great. Eva Lund.
Yes.
Eva.
I would wear a orangey red coat with a blue scarf.
Great. And is it Eva or Ava?
Eva.
And David Sherman, you were in my...
Yes, David, and last name is Sheehan. And I'm definitely a David, not a Dave. And I would definitely wear black because black is my favorite color.
Oh, okay. What the color of that? So we can change your name on the slide. Michelle.
I would wear a Kelly green color coat.
Kelly green. Very beautiful. Alina.
Definitely royal blue.
Royal blue, yeah. Excellent. Jamie Morris, the color of your coat.
I would probably go with charcoal gray, but I think I'd do something really bright, like a big blue shawl kind of thing as a scarf.
Yeah, color. And Jonathan, so it's just John, right?
Yeah, it's just John traditionally, because my father refuses to spell my name correctly. I would do black wool with red silk lining and a red scarf.
Yay. Carolyn.
So it's really hard to go at the end of this list because everyone has said all of the things that were my top 8 choices. But I'm going to copy, I think it was Mary who said that she would wear white. It would be dangerous for me because I'm messy, but I think I would wear white.
Yeah. Okay. And Betsy.
I would wear hunter and green, I believe.
Hunter green. So there was an olive green and then there was a hunter green. Right. And Marcos. Where are you, Marcos?
Hi, Brenda. I'm right here. It's nice to see you. Let's see, you probably know this about me. So I would wear first a shirt or a scarf of dark purple ruffles as a tribute to Hillary Clinton. And I would wear the dark gray blazer or coat to as a tribute to Vice President Harris. So I would wear both of the colors that they like.
That's nice. A symbolic coat, kind of like, yeah. And Nana.
I would wear cobalt blue.
Okay. Great. So we have lovely coats. You can imagine yourself with your coat on today as we go through. Let's go to the fourth slide. The fourth and fifth slides are outlined what we're going to do today. So I'm going to first do a small moment of housekeeping and sharing access. Actually, you've already done number 2. You've already met with each other. Out of order. I'm generally out of order. And then we're actually going to read this poem out loud together. We're going to do a quoted reading. And if you skip to the next slide, the next thing we will do is a small activity moment called embodied entrances. And then we'll move in the fifth part to actually a moment of talking about rhetoric in particular and applying rhetoric to the poem. And then I'm going to send you out for a minute to actually annotate a small piece of the poem, and we'll all come back together and talk about some of the annotations that we created. So that's our plan for today. And so shared access. One thing I want to do, what I always try to do is involve students in the process of taking notes for the class for others, because I'm sure, as you know, some people are really good at taking notes and some people are not at all. I'm not very good at taking notes. So I'd like to ask if a couple of people could be the note takers, 2 or 3 of you together. I believe that link on the slide is active and will take you to a Google Doc where you can keep notes, but you can also keep notes if you want on the slideshow itself down in the notes section below, however you want. So could I ask 2 of you out there to kind of take some little notes? I mean, I know you may all be taking your own note, but 2 people to be kind of our group note takers, active together. Who are the people that are good note takers? It doesn't have to be good, and I invite you to annotate your own notes, like add in a link to something we're talking about or whatever. Who will take notes for us? You have to say your name or put your name in the chat, if you will. Or so. Rob is there. So David, are you taking notes? Yes.
That was just that was to correct my last name in the previous slide.
Oh, she had, yeah, instead of showing. Okay, I see. All right, so now I saw John type his name in. Does that mean you're taking notes, John?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I do this also because, again, if some people aren't so good at taking notes, then we have a kind of community shared notes. Someone needs to join John on the document. It's much more fun when you get 2 or 3 people together, and then there's not as much pressure on, you don't have to lift him even quite as carefully. It's there. Yeah, so Betsy, yeah, it's fine if you take notes, Orly, because when we get to the end, we'll be sharing discussion. And then I need at least 1 person, but 2 is even better. I invite you to use the chat function. I know it's annoying for some people. It's not for me. So if it's annoying for you, just don't. Just try not to look, but I don't mind using the chat as an alternative way to speak or share. And you can also use the hands up function. But I'm not always very good at watching all these things because I already have 1, 2, 3 screens open for my access here. So give it up to someone else, chat. And Alela, thank you for watching the chat. And yeah, right? Oh, thank you for volunteering to be the 3rd note taker. Okay, so you have a document for the notes. So we have that taken care of. Thank you for sharing the access. And how about the next slide? All right. So this one is an image. It's actually by Frances Garriga, and it's actually on Etsy. She has a boutique, and you can actually order this poster if you want. So we're going to read the poem together, and I have assigned different parts, and let's go through each one of the slides so you know beforehand which slide is yours. You can either read from the poem if you have it on paper or the other line. I've also, I sent you a shared document that had all the lines of the poem and the stanzas, And I take that from the printed edition of the book. So that's how it's laid out. Each one, I call them stanzas. Each occupy one page, and then I counted the line. So that always helps us talk about the poem and be in certain places. And it's very intriguing to me, and must have been deliberate, right? Because there are 20 stanzas in this poem. It lays out across 20 lines. And there are 17 of you, so a couple of us have to repeat. So if you want to help me, Rennie, we're going to go through the slides. First slide, slide number 1 of the poem, is me. I'm going to read that. Next slide is Marcos, okay? And then third, Asia. And fourth, Rebecca, okay? And fifth, Nana, keep rolling. Sixth, Ashley. 7, Jonathan, John. Some of you get some long ones. 8, Michelle. 9, David. And 10, Carolyn, you get the longest one of all, I believe. 11, Mary. And 12, Lewis. 13, Catherine. Katie. 14, Jamie. 15, Alayla. 16, Betsy. 17, Alyssa is missing. Anyone want to take hers? Can't be Marcos. You already have a second one, Marcos. Ha ha.
I can do it. Becca.
Rebecca, okay. So just kind of remember that one. You can
Okay.
do Alyssa, who has a really strong sort of low voice, I remember. And then 18 is Eva. 19 is me. And closing out is Marcos again, because your last one, Marcos, echoes with the one that you read at the start. So let's do it. And it's okay if we fumble a little bit, and there'll be pauses if we forget our turn. So roll us all the way back to the beginning, right? And you can read this with all the performance or emphasis, however you want, or straightforward. I will begin. Mr. President and Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President and Mr. Emhoff, Americans and the world.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, the sea we must wade.
We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just is isn't always justice.
And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished.
Robert, if you want to play Roblox, you can join my game.
We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl, descended from slaves and raised by a single mother, can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one.
And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with a purpose.
To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside.
We lay down our arms so that we can reach our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all.
Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried. that will forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never know again, we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division.
Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb if only we dare it. Because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it.
We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy a country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated.
In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us.
This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves.
So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us?
We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free.
We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright.
So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. Every breath from our bronze pounded chests, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one.
We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South.
We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and dutiful, will emerge battered and beautiful.
When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if we're only brave enough to see it, if we're only brave enough to be it.
Okay, let's create a moment of unity and cacophony. If everyone who can, turn on your microphone, please. And let's say the last two lines together.
If only we were brave enough to see it.
If only we're brave enough to be it.
I've tried that before. It's very strange how the sound does not line up all together when everyone choruses in, which is a thing I didn't know about Zoom until I test ran this poem with a couple of people. And maybe you did know that already. Okay, excellent. Thank you all. So I think because I'm sure we've all listened to the poem, you know, several times over with her reading it itself, but to embody the language within it, I believe, is a very important move. And I always think it's an important move with poetry before you begin kind of studying it or working with it, is to it's not, well, I think of hearing, but literally the sound vibrations within your body inside it. And so that's also kind of an embodied entrance for us. This was part of our embodied entrance into the poem. So if you go back, if you go on to the next slide, Reen, as report. So we've done 3 out of our things already. And we've also actually just done an embodied entrance activity. And I'm going to do one more for that on the slide. And then we'll go to the rhetoric rendezvous and then active annotations with you working. So the next slide, this is going to be part of my embodied entrance. This is a quote from Amanda Gorman, an interview with her that appeared in the LA Times on Sunday, January 17th, 2 days before the inaugural. She said, quote, "But I don't look at my disability as a weakness. It's made me the performer that I am and the storyteller that I strive to be. And when you have to teach yourself how to say sounds, when you have to be highly concerned about pronunciation, it gives you a certain awareness of sonics, of the auditory experience." I put that up for me for the embodied entrance because I literally cried when I saw this quote. I would say in some ways it's the story of my life. People always wonder, as a deaf person, like how you learn to speak or how you learn to speak so well. And to me, or they also want to know, like, how do you hear music? That's often another thing. Well, we all hear music differently, right? And we all pay attention to sounds, right? If you ask 3 different students to describe a piece of music, you're going to get 3 different descriptions out of this. But this move that she's doing here is one I call disability as insight, where the disability is not the thing that prevents something, but instead that opens a door and offers insight. And think about her presence on the stage and learning. And I think that's probably part of learning to, like she said, to perform the language, to have to very deliberately work it through in the body and on the tongue. That's happening for her. The next slide is just a slide, if you would, Ren. These are all over, right? Of course, the internet. I only chose 4. There are dozens upon dozens, literally every moment of the poem. They capture on all these different gestures. I think this would be a very provocative thing to do with students, is to hand out slides or to give them a slide. Each one of them has a different gesture, and to explore and narrate out what that gesture means to them. What does that say? If you perform it on your own body, what does that feel like? It's a very important part of rhetoric. There was a whole period of rhetorical history called Allocutionary Rhetoric, starting with John Bulwer, actually in 1654, with a text called Chirologia and Chirolamina, which means the language of the hand. And he was actually a deaf educator, and his daughter, whose name was Chirolia, is probably where he got the ideas from. But basically, ideas is that there's a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot that we convey even with our hands and our gestures. And I felt watching Amanda Gorman, that she had that art down, the elocutionary art as well. There's a thing about presidential rhetoric and inaugural rhetoric and formal rhetoric spoken in a place like that, where it's drilled to keep the hands very limited and close to the body. So you see, I remember Bill Clinton's gesture was this. He did this a lot, but that's all. So if a president has a gesture that they use, signature, they're usually pretty tight and close into the body. So you saw Amanda Gorman breaking that frame pretty considerably in her text. And I think of the text as the thing that she spoke, but also the way that she delivered it as here. So from that moment, anybody else want to say anything about the delivery itself?
I found it riveting. It was performance art, and really quite moving. I think you experience the words more with the gestures.
Yeah.
I felt like too, I was thinking, I was like, her hands were singing it along with her. I sing as well, and it felt so so beautiful. And I was also thinking about sign language and the way she reminded me of, like, I love watching people do sign language because it's so beautiful often, and it conveys so much of the emotion that if somebody's not there and then a sign language interpreter is using it, I find it very moving and beautiful. I just thought it was wonderful how she did that.
So Mr. Sheehan says her hands took a journey as well as her words, and Eva saying singing and with the rhythm of her words in the chat.
And great chat watching, Alayla, there too. Yeah, so that would be a thing that I would do also with the poem. I'm going to do it this summer. We're just going to watch the poem. We're just going to watch it a couple of times with the sound all off.
You know what, I had a feeling about the fact that she didn't sound like poets read with a certain cadence that turns people off. I don't know if you know what I mean, but there's a certain sound that comes across, and it's almost intimidating, where she didn't have that at all. She was a natural reader. She read, you could feel what she was saying, and there wasn't any show to it, except her beauty, was the show, the way she did it.
So Jamie Morris says, I was surprised at how little the other poets at former inaugurations moved. Amanda Gorman's delivery was so much more powerful and so much more surprising. And Mr. Sheehan agrees, and Katie Fowley agrees as well.
Wow, these are great observations and things to bring up. And of course, on the internet, you can find the other inaugural poets. You can also find little videos in which people do little mock readings of poetry. They kind of mock how poets read, that poetic voice. And you're right. I also feel, though, that there are moments in the poem where she is doing a more conventional, and she does it also in the text itself. Many moments that you can use all the conventions that we use when we talk about, how to read a poem. It's all there in her text, but she also breaks the frame a lot. And that's why I thought about rhetoric as a frame. So we don't want to usually think about poetry necessarily being deliberately, intentionally rhetorical, but this is also an inauguration, so that's kind of called for here.
Some more comments for you. Caroline says, I wonder whether her willingness/ability to break the mold is part of her youth.
Mm-hmm.
And John Spear says, I believe it's an elegance intimately linked to her grace and power as a Black woman. And Betsy agrees with that comment.
Yeah. Or ponder that, right, with your students. What could be all the potential reasons why she's willing to break the frame? I think, again, for me, part of it's even nested back in that quote from Another Thing, is that she grew up already feeling a little bit stumblish with language. So learning to claim it as her own and take and make power from it to do something with it. Very good. Yeah. How about, let's move on to the slide that says Rhetoric Rendezvous. What piled up all the slides that come after this, or all the things that were on that potential homework sheet, where I invited you not to explore all of those things, but I tried to give you a grab bag, a tool bag of a lot of other things that you might use to explore the poem with. And I deliberately tried to seek out things that I hope might also be accessible to some of your students, and that they'd be able to read and access. I feel like I need to define rhetoric here for myself, for you. I always think about rhetoric as discourse, and that's not just speech or not just writing, but again, what the hands can do and what the body can do, what the voice can do, all of those, how the lines are laid on the page are all part of rhetoric. So it's a discourse of a way that conveys intentional meaning, although we could definitely also suggest that all of language conveys intentional meaning. But one thing that's helpful for me in thinking about rhetoric is I think about the classical time frames that Aristotle placed rhetoric in, and that was 3 containers, and these were not separate containers of persuasion and change that is aimed towards the future, which was deliberative rhetoric for him, political rhetoric, thinking about the future, and then persuasion and change that was aimed at the past, and that was coded as being forensic rhetoric, like excavating things from the past. And during Aristotle's time, that was the discourse of the courts primarily, right? Things that already happened in the past, and then the court deliberates on them and makes decisions. And my favorite at all, which is a discourse that is fairly missing from our times, right, except for things like inauguration, is epidictic. So it was a discourse that documented things, that was meant to celebrate something, to lament something, and located in the present time and the present situation. So Amanda Gorman's poem is obviously an exquisite example of epidictic discourse in action. So much to what I love about epidictic too is it's in the present tense, but it can't be in the present tense without also reaching for the past. It has to touch on the past in some ways. It has to, and it also has to project towards the future. And all epidictic really does this. So even though Aristotle set these up, the containers don't hold necessarily still, particularly when you move to epidictic. So I think about this piece of discourse as being in there, even in the way the passages that could be examined where she is calling on the events of January 6th, which of course the story is that that was the night she finished the poem. She was kind of spinning and stuck and struggling with a lot of it, and then the rest of it all came there. So she puts that moment in the poem without naming it ever directly, which I think is a pretty risky thing to do, right? Because she knows this poem is going to carry forward forever. I mean, all poetry does, but, and that 100 years from now, when we Google up inaugural poets and we run into this poem, that we might not necessarily know about the events of January 6th. So it kind of, in many ways, requires all of us who engage the poem in the future to go back to that moment in past and to rediscover its context. And so it won't let us erase it, in other words. And so she knew she was doing that. So all these things that we have on this slide, I'm gonna demonstrate a couple of things before we go to the annotations. I'm gonna choose a couple of things. I've already chosen epidictic and done a little bit. I've already chosen allocutionary rhetoric and chirology and chironomia, the language of the hand, as a couple of ways to demonstrate. The one I'm going to go to right now is one of my favorite rhetorical tropes, the favorite of all, chiasmus, so which is the Greek letter X. And so chiasmus to me is really, really powerful because you can find it directly located in language, just like when you run a phrase one way and then you run it kind of back another way. Ask not what you can do for your country. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. From John F. Kennedy's inaugural address is kind of a very classic example of chiasmus in play. I want to look right now at the first piece that I wrote, which we might not think, and maybe Irene, if you can go back to slide, it's the slide that has Mr. President and Dr. Biden on it, Madam Vice President and Dr. Thank you. So we probably don't necessarily think about this as the poem itself, but I think that it is, because without it, there are 19 pieces, 19 stanzas to this poem. So, and poets, we love the balance too. So I think that this was intended. Also, when you look at the other inaugural poets, you don't find, so this, and it was actually published in the book. And when you look at the other inaugural poets, you don't find that what has stayed with their poem is the actual thing they said formally before they began the poem. But this gets included in it. I also think it's part of the poem because it makes the chiasmus move, but it doesn't do so necessarily in the direct way as language, which is why chiasmus is powerful. Chiasmus also happens, the crossing happens when text, events, ideas cross each other and touch in certain places, and sometimes we have this sense like we feel them, a felt sense, I don't know. So look what's happening here, and I'm pointing at my screen, of course. Dang, I missed the board, don't you? the whiteboard, you didn't realize how much you missed those things. So any things here, I'm going to stop and see just a moment. I'll keep trying to pause. Are there things in the chat we want to read out?
So Asia says, I'm also interested in the ways that she allows silence to linger. And Marcos says, Gorman uses kairos a lot to play with time and space and events throughout that are alluded and referred to the passing of a trying time. Political rhetoric, loss of 4 years, the loss we carry, see we must wade, and processing this trauma.
Excellent. Yes. Kairos would be another one, the idea of timeliness. And that's that mention of particularly like calling up January 6th without naming it directly or even the date. So setting that down and timeliness. There's also what's happening here in the introduction, this opening is also exceptionally timely. So Mr. President and Dr. Biden, Madam Vice President and Mr. Emhoff, Americans and the world. So there are many things that are significant and different about this little bit. Can some of you maybe call out a couple things that some of this has never happened before?
There's the obvious crossing of the gender lines where it's Mr. President and his wife, who is referred to as doctor, but then Madam Vice President and her husband, which is, right? So there's the Mr. and the Mr. that are diagonal across from each other, and the doctor and the madam, and right, the doctor is female. We all know that by watching and, you know, the moment and whatever, that are also crossing each other diagonally.
Wow, I just got goosebumps when you said that, Carolyn, literally. You got it. It's really uncanny, isn't it? And it had to have been really deliberate. It wouldn't have been just an accident for it to set this up. But the Mr. President and Mr. Emhoff would have been, we've seen those before in inauguration, but we have not seen Dr. Biden, because Joe Biden is the first lady with a PhD. There were two, both Hillary Clinton, right, and Michelle Obama were JDs, doctors of the law, but it's the first time we have Dr. Biden, and then of course, obviously the first time we've seen a Madam Vice President, and they literally have crossed that, which then she sets up Americans and the world. So she brings that pairing in as well, and I feel as if, you know, Mr. President and Dr. Biden, a couple are set together, Madam Vice President and Mr. Emhoff are set together, and that means Americans and the world are set together. Because many openings or addresses like this only reference my fellow Americans, but she's also brought the world in here and paired it with Americans. I also, and this is poetry, right? So you can do this, interpretive license to do what we want. I thought it was really uncanny to think about this poem. I know some of you out here, because of some very direct references to Maya Angelou that she makes in the poem and moves that she makes. And I think Alila and Marcos actually taught the poem using also Maya Angelou's beside it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We did both the, we did Dr. Angelou's, Pulse of Morning and Hill We Climb back to back. But we first began a poetry unit using The Course of Captains instead. The poem she recited at the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Great. I love over here in the chat, the comma discourse. So much depends on a comma, right? That's great. So there have been 5 inaugural poets. Am I right now on the spot? Right, yeah. I mean, and of course, the first one was Robert Frost, 1961, invited by John F. Kennedy to read. And uncannily, there's a kind of crossing here. So Frost was 88 years old at the time. And John F. Kennedy was, anybody know, 43. And so now we've reversed. We have Joe Biden, who's 78, inviting a 22-year-old poet to read. So there's a gender crossing, but we've crossed this expanse of ages. And I have it at the bottom of the slide there. It's also uncanny. I mean, when Kennedy wrote to, Kennedy sent a telegram to Frost inviting him to do the poet, to read at the inaugural. And Robert Frost shot one back to him. And it basically kind of says, well, I suppose if you're brave enough to be the president at your age, I'm brave enough to be, read a poem at my age at your inauguration. So the reference again to the bravery of the ages, right? Oldest president with the youngest inaugural poet as well. So I could read chiasmus there. I'll mention a couple of other places. I'm looking at that. Another one, maybe line 12. See if I got the slide. Stanza 4. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. So crossing the idea of a new day and dawn, right, with the past tense. It's not, and yet the dawn is ours before we know it. It's the dawn is ours before we knew it. Of course, it also rhymes over too, but she has kind of mixed the tenses there and the feeling of past and present is changing. I'm going to find one more for you. I have many of them marked in here. Find one more. If anybody else finds one, please shout it out. Yeah.
There's lines 76 and 77. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us.
Yeah, I actually just landed on that one too. That's marked down. Those are my personal favorite lines in the whole poem. I mean, I love many other lines, but that one just echoes and echoes me. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. And so we're there in the present, in the moment, and the future and the past cross right through us. That's a great one. Somebody put stanza 14. Oh yeah, that one, total chiasmus. And there it is in the language itself. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? So flipping the catastrophe scene, but also asking and asserting. Yep, straight out of JFK. Okay. So that's just a few of examples. I'm looking at time. I'm mindful of time here. What I want us to do, had we more time, I would have asked you to pick out a couple of rhetorical moments here, and we might look at one other kind of rhetoric in the poem, but we've done a couple of examples, so I'm going to let us go with that. I want to take a moment here for you to go off with your stanza. Each of you has a stanza, and take a moment just to look at 5 minutes. You can make your screen dark if you want, if that makes you more comfortable, and turn your sound off. Look at your stanza, annotate it in some ways, ask it questions, note something about its language, think about it rhetorically, think about it in the stanza before it or afterwards. I don't care what it is, there's no right answers here, but take a moment, everyone, to do an annotation of close reading of just your stanza, if you would. It is 5:08. Let's come back here about 5:13 for the last 15 minutes together, okay? Okay, let's come back together. I know I didn't give you much time. And if we were in another time and place, what I would have done instead was had every one of these passages, right, on a big giant like sticky note around the room. And you could have annotated on your own sticky note, and then we would have done like a gallery walk, and people would have come and admired your annotation, added a few of your own, would have spun it on that way several times. You guys made the reference I saw in the chat to Hamilton. That just blew my mind. You're right. That's exactly where the line is from. Right, clever girl. And that. So somebody, what you discovered, and let's look close at a couple of these. And obviously we can't get to all of them, but I want to invite you to, if you want to put your annotations in the actual PowerPoint, and then we'll have that all as shared notes together that you can use to build on yourself. But what did somebody see out there? Who wants to? Carolyn, you typed something in the chat. You wanna speak it out? You wanna dwell on it a second?
Sure. So I went kind of deep on that illusion. I did a deep dive on the vine and fig tree. It's in Hamilton, yes. But it's in Hamilton because George Washington used that quote from the Bible apparently very frequently in addresses and in letters. He very famously used it in his farewell address. And in the song that it appears in Hamilton, it's the One Last Time song where Hamilton is trying to convince George Washington to run again. And he's saying, no, I'm not going to run for re-election. So there's a way of interpreting that as a nod to the peaceful transfer of power that George Washington was very intent on having take place in our country, which at the time that Amanda Gorman's poem is read had very nearly not taken place.
Wow, fabulous. So now that we've called forward Hamilton as well too, my sense is, right, Kairos, is that there's probably more references in here. Maybe not a ton, but poets will often do that, choose a couple of primary allusions. Maya Angelou is there, definitely in here in several places, but so that would be a thing like with students, is to find those connections and work them forward. Yeah, that was really good. Yeah.
In my stanza of 18, I didn't really like it all of that much until then I saw, and you mentioned like, put it in context with the stanza before and after. And then I thought, wow, it's such a great continuation and contrast with the previous two lines, like, because it says in line 109, we will raise this wounded world. And then that phrase, we will, continues, but it changes to we will rise. And I feel like it goes from like a struggle, we will raise, it's hard work to raise something up, to then this idea of rising. And with me, it's sort of like there's something like the sun rises and there's almost like a, oh, what is it? Like a vision, like this unearthly vision. And all those exclamation points, it really seems like it's maybe not a climax, but there's a crescendo there and an ease in that stanza.
Actually, it's funny that you say you didn't like it. It is really cheesy, that stanza, but it's actually one of my favorites because that, like you said before, so the raises, and then she starts, I will rise, and there's so much movement in this poem, like you said, stepping back into the past to repair. You'll find those movement lines over, and if I would be inclined again in the vein of elocutionary rhetoric, you know, to have students perform these things. Imagine staging it out like on a stage, not just a performance with the reading, but if you're going to move the pieces of this poem around, and that was there. It's also, those lines are like straight out of America the Beautiful, right? So she's crossing back with the song, Oh Beautiful, for this guide for amber waves of grain. I mean, she's not using exactly the same kinds of images for different, but crossing the country in that way. It's also a moment for a poet, especially in an inaugural lecture, to do the kind of obligatory parallelism movement, or the 4 lines that create parallels, we will rise, we will rise. And there's also at least one more really profound allusion or reference. It goes straight back to Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. Just watch Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. Watch her performance of it, and she's just calling all of that forward as well. So, but it's not just still I rise, it's we will rise, we will rise, we will rise.
That's also, it's very Whitman-esque, that big listing in the long lines that I've been, and Whitman too, his project is to knit America back together during the pre-Civil War and, post-Civil War. So there's that calling back to, one of our authors of American poetry. And I had 17, and I just thought it was an interesting link because we got on line 105. So we've got the rhetoric of like, okay, I'm moving now into like, what are we going to do about it? And here's what she's laying out. We leave behind a country better than the one we left. And I love it that like the bronze-chested warrior is this battle and warrior calling people to arms, not to win any, not to physical battle, but to raise the wounded world into a wondrous one.
Oh, exquisite. I'm totally geeking out here, right? I was talking right before this. I have my weekly BFQ editorial team meeting, and assistant editor is American Studies and Black Studies major at Yale, graduate student, and then my assistant editor is also, my co-editor's in writing studies. But I was telling him like how excited I am for today, because how wondrous it is to come into a room where everyone loves to geek out on this stuff as much as you do, right? And they've all read the material beforehand. Like, it doesn't happen to us as teachers, right? So the joy that is. So excellent with that. I'm going to back up just one right before that, since we're right in that area. I felt, but again, maybe I'm working it too hard, in stanza 16, which ends with, and change, our children's birthright. I felt that was a call back to Robert Frost's poem, The Gift Outright. And I believe birthright is that term even is in the poem. And the story with that Robert Frost address, which is a great one in itself, is that was not the poem that he wrote for Kennedy's inaugural. The poem he wrote is one called Dedication, but he had it still handwritten on kind of like hotel paper. And at that point in his life, Robert Frost couldn't see very well at all. And the sun was really bright. Apparently it was a little windy. And it was on like vellum paper, and the sun was really bright, so he could hardly make out his own handwriting. So at the last moment, he just recited that, The Gift Outright, which he had memorized it already, the format. And apparently it was a poem that JFK liked, which is partly why JFK asked him to come be the inaugural poet. So he didn't read the poem he wrote, he read one that was in his head because he couldn't see the one that he wrote. So, that's right. Let's do somebody else.
I'll go.
I'm sorry.
So Brenda, you had me read the last one, 20. I saw I didn't know this term before, polysyndeton. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. It's the first time I ever used that to use and annotate a poem. I felt, this poem, it ends with this feeling of an existential struggle. I thought at first when I heard it, it was extremely hopeful. People were cheering, but the fatalist in me thinks that it's kind of an existential struggle. Like, when it says, when the day comes, you step out of the shade, aflame unafraid, then the new dawn blooms as we free it. So it's up to us to free it. And if we're brave enough to see it, brave enough to be it, it means taking a chance to get out of trauma, or complacency. You have to get a sense of urgency and agency to make change. It's kind of like if you've been traumatized by the last 4 years of the Trump administration, you're going to have this feel of collective trauma. So I feel like Amanda Gorman might be saying, okay, it's progress, and I couldn't help but connect it to the George Floyd murder trial, how it is accountability, but it's not full progress yet, and there's a lot of work to be made.
Wow, fabulous. And of course, like you just said, that's why I had you read both parts, is because the poem goes back to where it began. And yet it flips it, there's a crossing there again too, because it starts with the day comes, we were looking for the light to get out of the shade, but now we go back and we actually step, okay, we were in the shade and we step out of the shade. Movement there. And these are all the things like light. I play with light. I have on a place commonplaces, to rhetorical commonplace. Those things that we kind of expect to be in poetry. And light is definitely one way up there on a popular commonplaces. So this is again how she moves within conventions and then also reworks the conventions as well. And if you remember in the reading, those last lines, right, if only we're brave enough to see it, then there's a pause before she says the last line. And it's a long enough pause that for a moment you think she's finished the poem. And then that last line is delivered kind of like a coda, if only we're brave enough to be it. Some of you mentioned the way that she uses the silence and the pause commas as well. Line 128, Lance 1-5. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I also wanted to say that the lines that I had, which were, I'm sorry, I'm looking at it right now. I'm sorry, give me a second to find it. I lost it all of a sudden. I had 89 to 93. 89 to 90, where she says, we will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. For me, it kind of struck out as, okay, we've tried it the voluntary way, but at some point we're going to get to an involuntary way of evoking change in this country. And we will get there, no matter what. We will be moved there one way or the other.
Yeah. 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 I have that. That's another crossing moment. We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. And what's in the center is you in the place, right? Marching back and then also moving forward at the same time. Another great movement moment.
In my
Wonderful. I'm looking at time. One more.
I had a
Yeah.
good job. Chloe.
I had stanza 7, which is lines 29 through 38, and I thought that this one was more of her deliberate rhetorical turn, where she starts to ask the readers to make a decision about the future they want to be in. And to me, it's very clear that she's hearkening back to MLK and that I Have a Dream, sort of referencing his own metaphor in a way that America had bankrupted on a check. And now that debt is being come due. Because she asks us, all right, so if you're going to compose this country, if we're going to do these things and harken back to these values that we talked about when we were climbing that hill back then we have to also lift our gazes to something else. So she asks us to take note of the many beginnings, and that it's kind of like harkening that America's in the world. Everyone's eyes are on us. And now we have to zoom back to what we promised then, why we're here now, and then how are we going to get to our future first? We have to put those differences aside. So I think she calls us back into a historical moment and then pans out into the future really well. It becomes like a more deliberate rhetorical choice there.
I was going to say, I had stanza 8. It was pretty short, and I was like, what am I going to do with stanza 8? What I focused in on was the verbs. It was lay, reach, and seek. And when I was looking at those verbs are verbs of motion. And those verbs are the only way that we're going to get to where she says in the last line of that stanza, to reach harmony for all.
What you guys have uncovered too, over and over again, which I now see even more strongly. I felt it already. There was always this movement between the past and the present. But what I got when I listened to all of you is how it's always the we or the I, the body speaking, that is bringing those two things together, that the things come between you. Also, what you just said there, Michelle, that lay down our arms so that we can reach out arms to one another is, two different meanings of arms, right? Crossed over each other. But that's also a classic synecdoche where a part stands for the whole and arm stand. All right. So 1 minute left. This has been absolutely wonderful. And here's one of the beauties of access to Robert Miller out there. Can you come? Can you turn on your camera a second? There you are. Thanks to the magic of Rob's fingers, we have a full transcript of this whole event, and I will share that with you as well. Don't forget it there. I have one. I see Ashley, you got your hand up. Would you?
I was going to share about my stanza, but I realize we're out of time, so I can wait until next time.
Oh.
David, did you want to jump in quickly?
Same thing. I was going to follow Aaliyah because she was the 8th stanza and the 9th stanza, but in the interest of time, next week.
I am happy to stay and hear more, but I am also very aware that we all have limits, and I take no offense when screens start going dark and people need to go, but I would really love to hear from Ashley and David, so I'm going to stay and listen to.
And I'll just jump in very quickly to say that we will keep this open because I think everyone is appreciating the quality of the conversation. And so if you do need to leave, thank you so much for being here. It's been great to have you. But otherwise, we'll continue to hear more and give ourselves a few more minutes to enjoy our time together.
Thank you all. See you all next time.
So, David, your hand was, I think, up first. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. So thank you, Renee. So I was the 9th stanza, and I won't repeat it because you all have access to it, but it seemed to me to be in 2 parts. The first was the first 4 lines. It's very much the world is watching what's going on. And she is talking about the resilience in the face of the awfulness that was the 4 years of the Trump administration. For each challenge, there was a reaction to that. It's very much past as prologue, and then line 46 ends with a period. So done. From 47 to 52, it's about moving forward. It's about the future and how we're going to, where we were tested dearly. Now we're looking forward to the future in a shared vision that was forged in the difficult past. And so much of the poem, to me, is about the confrontation between the past and our history and confronting that, and the sins of the country, and the idealism and the determination and the resilience to move forward in a better, more harmonious, more united way. Thank you.
Great. I see in the chat too, also people that the permutation, you could spend a long time with students, I think, just looking at all those permutations of sound. Again, the classical conventional stuff that poets will work with, and how she kind of works them in some way, some of her own unique ways, while she still calls on things like long strings of C. The letter C is very prevalent throughout the poem. You know what I want to say, David, also just about that line is that while I definitely, because there are the other political references in here, particularly that, but I also read that even as we grew, even as we hoped, I also read that as the COVID-19 year we've just been through. Also felt that that could be a moment of pausing for that.
Yes, very, very much so. Thank you.
Ashley, one more.
So I had stanza 6, which I think kind of like transitions into 7, 8, and 9. And stanza 6 has the lines, but that doesn't mean we're striving to form a union that is perfect, right? Which is an allusion to the preamble. We are striving to forge our union with purpose. So we have that, like, this is what I see as that cross thing you were talking about earlier, which what struck me about this poem in like the first time I listened to it was what I just thought of as like her play on words, right? Because I didn't have the word to describe like what I was like observing, and maybe I shouldn't admit that as an English teacher, but here we are. And I just love like the cross that's here, but also the difference between like to form a union and our union. I just think is like really interesting.
Yeah. And she's rewriting the Constitution there, folks, right? and on the tape, the one I've seen, which is the one from the New York Times, I think is the one that I've watched the most often. You can see Biden's kind of a little bit shocked reaction to that. He does a little bit of his eyebrows shoot up for a second. I mean, take that striving to form a perfect union line and mix it up a little bit. That sounds like a good place for us to end, rewriting the Constitution, right? And we the people. You guys have been truly delightful.